Good afternoon, brethren. We have about 3 minutes before we begin services, so you begin to wind down, find your seats. We'll begin services in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Good morning, brethren. We have 6 seconds before we begin services. So if you begin finding your seats, understand you're enjoying the wonderful fellowship, which is great on this wonderful day of this feast, this Day of Atonement. What an awesome day that this day represents, and that we can be here to celebrate and worship with God. It is time to begin services. I'd like to welcome all of those on the internet who are with us today. Glad you can be with us. So if you'd all please stand, we'll begin services by turning to hymn number 78. Let's all sing out, make a joyful noise together by singing Holy Mighty Majesty, hymn number 78. very fine beginning, brethren. You're all in great sounding voice today. For our second hymn, we turn to hymn number 21. We'll sing hymn number 21, I Will Praise Thee, O Eternal. Hymn number 21. For our third hymn, brethren, we'll sing hymn number 121. Hymn number 121, Hallelujah, Praise God. And following this hymn, I'd like to ask Mr. Reggie Sinan to come up and lead us in the opening prayer. Hymn number 121. Sing unto thee, eternal, sing your praises to him. Put your trust not in mortal, for in them is no help. Hallelujah, praise God. The eternal shall reign. He shall reign for all ages, our King and our God. Sing unto give your praises to him. It was who made heaven, earth and seas and all things. Hallelujah, praise God. The eternal shall reign. He shall reign for all ages, our King and our God. Sing unto the eternal, let your hope be in him. He remains true forever. He gives justice to all. Hallelujah, praise God. The eternal shall reign. He shall reign for all ages, our King and our God. Now the opening prayer by Mr. Sinan.
Almighty God in heaven, we come before you so grateful to be gathered here on this day, your holy day, and we just thank you for what this day pictures and the ability to be gathered here together. And we just ask for a special blessing on the messages that we're about to hear. Please bless the listening as well as the speakers, and we just thank you for all things in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Please be seated. Brethren, for the sermonette this afternoon will be by one of the elders serving the congregation, Mr. Chuck Sinan.
Good morning, or afternoon. I knew I was going to do that. I turned to Reggie when I heard that he was giving the opening prayer, and I said, be sure to pray for the speakers. And he said, we're going to pray for mercy on the listeners. And I That's no way to talk about Mr. Frank's sermon. So, well, welcome to everybody online, to our brethren down in Fort Myers as well, and welcome to the Feast of Atonement here in the land of Goshen, as we like to refer to Florida. This day of Atonement, is my favorite of all of the holy days. I know you're thinking, well, all of God's holy days are wonderful, but some of the feast days have physical and spiritual blessings that go with them. So I get that, but this one today is my favorite of them all. Let me explore with you what I'm talking about by asking you a question. Have you ever sought justice in your life? Has there ever been a case where you were looking for justice and were disappointed by the results? Justice is defined in the dictionary as a just behavior or treatment. A just behavior or treatment. To explain it, the dictionary has a sentence that says, a concern for justice, peace, and a genuine respect for people. A second definition they had that is justice is the quality of being fair and reasonable. Being fair and reasonable. And the definition or the explanation for it is the justice of one's case. The justice of one's case. And the third and final one is probably the most obvious, that it is the administration of law or authority in maintaining peace. If you think about the scales of justice being held up, the administration of law and authority. When I had the opportunity and the blessing of owning my own business, it came with unique opportunities as well. Maybe they're not just unique to owning a business, but they were, at least in my career, unique to that period of time. One of those opportunities was the opportunity to be sued. And every time, I just want to be clear, they were always false accusations. Always, I know. You probably are wondering, but no, they were all false. And the way this would work is you would be sued and we'd pay out. And by the end, by the time we sold the business, many, many thousands of dollars. These lawsuits were never designed to go to court. They were designed to settle at a rate that would be less than it would cost to go to court and pursue justice in the court of law. Let me give you an example of just one of the many times we were sued. We had an employee come to us, and she told us of another employee who was stealing from us. Turns out we never could figure out how she was doing it, but she was taking 50-pound bags of sugar through the security gates to her car, dividing it up into little pouches, and then selling it at the flea market. We pursued this rumor, we followed it, we monitored this young lady, and found out that indeed she was stealing. We caught her red-handed, as they say, stealing. The police were called. She was dismissed from her employment, which was difficult to do in a union shop. Several weeks later, we were presented with a lawsuit for discrimination, alleging that we targeted her due to her ethnic origins. The lawsuit was ridiculous, of course, but as the lawyers know, the longer you can drag these things out, the more they cost our attorney to fight it. At some point, it just becomes cheaper to settle, and you pay out not only our attorney, but a settlement to the alleged victim. You walk away, you lick your wounds, and you think there is no justice. I think that's partly why this day, this holy day, the Day of Atonement, even with the fasting, represents for me my favorite holy day, because it represents a day when justice will be served. The idea of justice, I believe, appeals to our very core. I think God put in us this innate desire to see justice done. After all, it always feels good when you see justice done, whether it is in a court case that we're watching in the news or whether it's in a movie where it is played out. Let me give you 3 examples of justice. One where justice was served, one where there is perceived injustice, and one where people are afraid that justice will be undone. John Wilkes Booth, as we know, assassinated President Lincoln. And there was a 12-day search for Mr. Booth. They chased him down to Virginia where they caught him. They brought him back to Washington so that justice could be served. He and his cohorts went to court, they were convicted, they were hung by the rope until found dead in the courtyard of the prison. The nation, although mourning the loss of our president, moved on. They felt that justice had been done for the Lincoln family and for the nation. The second one is President Kennedy. President Kennedy, as we all remember, was assassinated in the 1960s. There are many that believe that justice has not been served, or at least it is not complete. I am not making a case for one way or the other, but there are many thousands, if not tens of thousands of people that believe that Mr. Kennedy's assassin got away, that justice has not been served. They are in a state of unrest because of this. The third is Mr. Kennedy's brother. Sirhan killed Bobby Kennedy on film at the Ambassador Hotel in L.A. He's now served 52 years of a life sentence in California. Or is it a life sentence? As it turns out, right now the state of California is contemplating letting Sirhan go. 9 of the 11 children that Bobby Kennedy had do not want his release. They feel it would be an injustice to Bobby, to the family, and to the nation. So justice either gives you peace or it can give you unrest. You see, when justice is served properly, there is a collective relief, a joy that comes from justice being done. Turn with me to Proverbs chapter 21. Proverbs 21, and let's look at the first half of verse 15. It is a joy for the just to do justice. There is a joy that comes with justice. When you think about our Western court system, there are 3 steps to the process of seeking justice. And I suppose you could make it 4, but I've combined the first with the accusation of the crime and then the trial to see if it was so. The second is judgment. Was the accusation just? And the third requires sentencing if, in fact, the accusation was just and the person is found guilty. If you think about the process in our physical system and contrast it with what's happening on a spiritual level, there's an interesting, at least for me, parallel. Anyone who has ever followed a high-profile case as it works its way through the courts know that there are gaps in the process in these 3 steps. Trials can take some time in some cases to work its way through the courts. In other cases, they can move very swiftly. Our adversary, Satan the devil, it moved very quickly. Turn with me to Genesis chapter 3, and we'll look at 2 verses here, verses 14 and 15. He was accused and tried. It says, "So the Lord said to the serpent, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all the cattle, more than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." As we know, after a trial is complete, the next step, as we discussed, is judgment. And this phase does not always come immediately. The judge needs to proclaim a verdict, but sometimes he'll sit and contemplate that for times in our physical system. This process is also somewhat paralleled with our enemy. Turn with me to John chapter 19. It's interesting in our system that you can be convicted and still be let free, waiting your judgment. If you think of Bernie Madoff as an example, there are people that are allowed to go back out into the community until the judge passes final judgment. And we find it here in John 19. We'll read verses 28 and 30. It says, "After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scriptures must be fulfilled, said, I thirst." Here we see that the trial is over. They're going to take a sponge and dip it in some sour wine and put it up to Jesus' lips there on the stake. And in verse 30 it says, "So when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, 'It is finished.' Bowing his head, he gave up the spirit." Conviction was complete. Judgment is passed. Have you ever noted, though, in a trial, in the physical sense in this world, that the accused is convicted and still yet allowed some freedom, awaiting the sentencing? Many times they will be allowed out still into the society until sentencings come. This particularly happens in white-collar crime. It is the same here. Satan has been tried. Satan has been found guilty. Satan has been convicted, and he still awaits his sentencing. Until the day the guilty is sentenced and taken away to serve their time, there is no peace for their victims. And so it is for us. As long as Satan is allowed out, there is no peace for mankind. I'm sure Satan is so deceived that he believes that he can still overturn his sentence. It will not be so. Justice will be served. Today represents that day where God the Father, Jesus Christ, will see that justice is done, on which our enemy will be taken by force and delivered to his jail cell to serve his sentence. How unbelievable is that? If you just contemplate that one fact, it should bring a peace and a joy to us, just knowing that this day will come when justice will be served. Since the trial began, all the way back when Satan was first corrupted our parents, Adam and Eve, all the way down to this present day, and unfortunately yet beyond, because the day has not come yet for his sentence, much time has passed. So to see him receive the judgment, the sentence which will bring peace on all mankind, or as it says in Proverbs, joy, that day, the Day of Atonement, that is why this day is my favorite of the feast days. The spring holy days points us to our own sins and our own needs to turn from our own judgment that has been passed on us, and the need for a price to be paid for us to be released from our own sins. Trumpets, of course, pictures that day that we receive the Holy Spirit, that our judge gives us the help to fight the enemy that is still on the loose. And trumpets, the day pictures the power and the might of Jesus Christ returning with judgment in his hand to execute the sentence against our enemy. And atonement, this great day, points to the day that judgment will be executed. Chained and bound, he will be taken to serve out his sentence in darkness. We all are commanded to fast today, to humble ourselves, which in turn causes us to understand our own weakness, our juxtaposition to God Almighty, our need for him to execute judgment, to free us finally from this enemy. But when you think about today, and you think about fasting, and you think about what today represents, you got to ask yourself, who could possibly think about food or drink on a day like this, a day when justice will be served?
Well, brethren, if you'd please stand, we have another opportunity to blend our voices together, singing praises to God. We'll sing hymn number 146. Hymn number 146, Go Ye Therefore Into All the World. Hymn number 146.
Baptize them into the
very fine. Please be seated. Brethren, just have one announcement. I'll get to it. It says, as you were entered into services today, that you were given an information sheet, which basically looks a lot like this, or it looks exactly like this one. It says you were given the information sheet on the COVID-19 protocols for this year's Feast of Tabernacles, and also an access sheet to Kagwa's feast sites. If anyone did not receive these 3 sheets, please see Rose Materin after services. So that's the only announcement I have. Being that this is a holy day, we do have an opportunity to hear from another elder serving the congregation for the offertory message, be by Mr. Jim McTiernan.
Good morning to you all. Welcome to those on the webcast. And on behalf of Mr. Hafley and the brethren here, we'd like to welcome Mr. and Mrs. Franks to the St. Petersburg congregation. I'm glad to see everything is set up right. At about 12 o'clock this morning, I got a call from my representative here, and she said, I'm just checking in to make sure everything is set up for tomorrow. And after Rose revised me, I said, whoa, it's for today. And she said, okay, that's right. It was for today. But anyway, brethren, I won't spend a lot of time in the offertory remarks, since Mr. Hafley a few days ago at the Feast of Trumpets expounded on them for us in detail. But I would like to rehearse a few scriptures that we could go to. I'd like to go over to Deuteronomy 16. In Deuteronomy 16 and verse 16, Deuteronomy 16 and verse 16, we read, 3 times in a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, at the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall give as he's able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. Brethren, as we read here, we're commanded to bring an offering during God's holy day seasons. In 2 Corinthians 9, and in verse 7, Second Corinthians 9 and verse 7, it says, so let everyone give as he has purposed in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. Notice, God loves a cheerful giver. And in Proverbs 22 and verse 9, I'll just read this from the New American Standard Version. Quote, in the first part of Proverbs 29 and verse 9, it reads, he who is generous will be blessed. So, brethren, to think about it, to be loved and to be blessed by the God of all creation is in essence the pearl of great value. Now, normally, brethren, at this time we'd pass offertory baskets, but with the unique situation we're in and the COVID virus, and out of an abundance of caution, it's been decided that we won't be passing baskets today. But in order to fulfill our obligation, we've been given 3 options, and we could give an offering online, we could give an offering by mail directly to headquarters, and the address, and I'll try to read it real slow, is Kagwa, P.O. Box 731480, Dallas, Texas, and the zip is 75373-1480. And the third option, we've set up a drop box at the rear of the room, and there you'll find envelopes available. And we do ask that if you're making out a check, you'd make it out to either Church of God or COG is acceptable. So, brethren, today we have the opportunity to hear from the president of the Church of God Worldwide Association, Mr. Jim Franks.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think I'm the only one that got that right today. So I do know it's afternoon, but it's good to see all of you. It's nice to be here. We arrived safely yesterday and had a wonderful meal with the Sinans late yesterday afternoon. But you know what? He did not offer me breakfast today. So I don't know if I'll do that trick again. So that was... We had a good time. It was really nice being here. We're here, of course, on our way to the feast in Fort Myers. We'll be there Monday evening and give us an opportunity to go over and visit with my mother. We have our youngest daughter and her family all coming in. We're meeting them later this evening over in Orlando, and then they'll go and see my mother. And my mother's never seen their children, so she's our youngest daughter and has three of our grandchildren, and so my mother's never met them. So we try to get everybody together. My mother will be 92 on her birthday. She's not able to get out at all, doesn't obviously get to church, and so it'll be an opportunity for us to do that, and then go on down to Fort Myers on Monday evening for the beginning of the feast, and then to Tucson after that, and then hopefully to El Salvador for the last couple of days of the feast. That we're looking forward to that. Of course, we have a daughter that lives there as well, and so far it looks like it'll be okay. This will be my first international trip since all of this started, a year and a half or so ago. So we're looking forward to that. Hopefully there won't be any glitches along the way. I think we always have to be prepared for that. You were given a form when you came in today, and I'd like to just make a couple of comments about that. And what is this all about, and what are we doing? As you all know, we've held a ministerial conference back in August, just a wonderful conference. We did have some individuals who came down with COVID after the conference. Some may be traceable to the conference, others traceable to a church service prior to the conference. We had a variety of things that happened. And we actually had one couple, Larry and Wilma Lambert, who were in the hospital, very seriously ill, and just came home yesterday. So they were ill for 3 weeks, been 21 days. In speaking to Mr. Lambert, he lost 38 pounds in 21 days. He weighed 188, and he weighs 150 now. They were very seriously ill. I would say right now, from all we know, there are probably more people from the church or in the church that have either come down with COVID recently or even sick now that won't be able to go to the feast. In some ways, it's worse this year than it was last year as far as the spread. So in discussing all of this and coming out of the conference, we felt it wise as the church as a whole to encourage caution this year at the feast, not to take away any of your joy for the Feast of Tabernacles, celebrating and being with your family and your friends. We're going to do all of that, but that we certainly be very cautious. And as a result of that, the church has taken certain positions. We've asked all of our feast sites to work out seating so that we're not all crammed together. It won't all be completely social distancing, but it'll be some distance in the seating arrangement. And that works fine for all of our feast sites. They're all large enough. The meeting facility is large enough that we're able to do that, with a couple of exceptions. And one of those is potentially, or actually is, Alaska, where we were already overbooked. The capacity of the hall was 300. We accepted 400. Again, we could get them in. It wasn't beyond the fire code, but it was more than what we should have had. So we were already in a crowded situation in Alaska. So in Alaska, we will need to go to an alternating service, at least as it looks right now. And in Hawaii, of course, because of the restrictions from the government, we'll be going to alternating services there. So those are a couple of things. Also, we're not having some of the activities we would normally have, such as the senior citizen in most places. Depends on the locale and the setup. Also, some of the other large group activities that we might have inside, sponsored by the church. Now, obviously, people are going to get together, and we understand that, and that's not an issue. But for the church to sponsor it, we won't be doing some of those things this year. That's going to require groups of individuals in crowded conditions in a smaller room for an extended period of time. So those things will not be done this year at most of the sites. Some sites, they can do outdoor activities. Most of those, obviously, are going to be fine. It's not because we're afraid of anything. We're not afraid of the virus. We're not afraid of certainly what's going on. We're cautious as to what's going on, and believe, given the spread in certain communities, and virtually all of the communities where we have a feast site, there is quite a large spread, or quite a large amount of the virus in those communities. Some are really higher than others, as you know. So if it's in the community, then obviously it could easily be in the church during the Feast of Tabernacles. So out of an abundance of caution, we're taking these steps. We believe they're minimal, should not be disruptive to anyone's Feast of Tabernacles, but things that we really believe we should do. So again, we'll hope you're understanding about that, and certainly many of you have experienced within your own families or among your friends that this virus can be very, very bad. For some people, it seems pretty simple, pretty straightforward. For others, it's been very, very, very bad. And of course, we've even lost some members in the last few weeks who've died from COVID. So all of that together puts us in a position going to the Feast of Tabernacles where we're all together for 8 days, that we just be cautious. That's all we're saying. Pray for God's protection, which we do. God did not give us the spirit of fear, so it's not out of fear, but it's out of caution. And again, just wanted to mention that. So that's what you received today on opening night of the feast. I have a short note that I've written to be read to the congregations, just, again, expressing some of these same things that I'm expressing here, and a very short note to the brethren as we begin the Feast of Tabernacles, but reminding them that we're there to rejoice, we're there to celebrate God's holy days, and we plan to do that. So that's where things are. We didn't expect it to be where it is at this time after last year, but we obviously had no control over any of that. But we feel we're doing fine. The church is certainly doing fine, and looking forward to a wonderful Feast of Tabernacles, and I hope you are as well. Well, it is the Day of Atonement. I believe it's impossible to explain the full meaning of this day in one message. But I'm only going to give one message, so don't get too concerned. But I think that's the same with all of God's holy days. The richness and the depth of meaning of the holy days is impossible to exhaust. And I know many of you have been keeping the feast for many, many years, and there's still so much more to learn and so much to gather. I appreciated Mr. Sinan's sermonette, and in many ways, he and I were looking at the Day of Atonement in a similar fashion. If you're over 21 in this audience, then you've probably received one. It comes in an official envelope, often from the county. In my case, Collin County, Texas. About every 2 years to 5 years, you get this in the mail. You open up the envelope, or sometimes it'll just be a card, and it has in bold black letters, jury summons. And you have one of those. You've been summoned to serve on a jury. You're requested to show up at a specific time, dressed appropriately, and you're instructed that every person accused of a crime has the right to a fair and impartial jury of his or her peers. Now, over the years, I've always been able to be excused from the jury service. I've requested that. conscience objection, and I've been excused serving on a jury over the years. But I have gone and sat in the main hall when they explain to you what a jury does. And you have all of the people gathered, and they're going to select certain numbers to be on a jury, and there'll be alternates, all of that are selected. And they explain to everyone what it means to be on a jury. You are to consider that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. You're told that there will be two phases to this court case. First of all, there will be the trial, and then, of course, there will be the sentencing, as even Mr. Sinan referred to as well. But those are two phases with the same jury. So the jury that convicts, or of course if they declare a person to be innocent, then there is no sentencing phase. But that same jury comes back a few weeks later to actually give the sentence. Or, of course, in some cases, the judge will obviously give the sentence. But the jury comes to hear that. There's the trial phase when the prosecutor and the defense attorney present their case. The jury listens intently, then goes into deliberations. Now, these may last for a few hours or may last for a few days or in some cases a few weeks. And then they come back with the verdict. The clerk of the court then reads the verdict. That ends that first phase. But if the person is found innocent, the case is closed. But if found guilty, there is the sentencing phase. We had a really highly publicized case in Dallas just a few years ago. It was a tragic case where a police officer came home in the evening. She'd been working a long shift. She got to the wrong floor, came to the wrong floor of her apartment complex, went to the wrong door. She was a floor above where her apartment was. The door was ajar, and she was concerned. She pulled out her weapon, pushed the door open, and there was a man standing in the hallway, and she shot him several times. He was unarmed, and of course, he was killed. She was in the wrong apartment. A completely innocent man. She pled her case. She gave a very convincing and I think very sincere sorrow for what she had done and was asking for mercy in this whole particular case. She was convicted. The jury instructed that she was guilty, or the jury came back with a sentence, and she's now serving her sentence. You know, there's some huge issues on the Day of Atonement that must be considered as we look forward, of course, to what comes beyond. What happens today? What does this day really mean? What does it have to do with justice? What does it have to do with atonement? What does atonement mean anyway? What is it really all about? A number of years ago, I served as a chaplain at a prison. It was a part of my responsibility in the Houston area. And I met a lot of individuals over the years. There was a time when we had several Bible studies every month in different prison units, and you would have anywhere from a dozen to up to 50 or 60 prisoners in a Bible study. As a chaplain, you were told you could never ask them what they did to be in prison. That was always kept confidential. But they could tell you what they had done. They can talk with you, but you could not ask them. And over the years, virtually everybody I met would say, well, he was guilty. He was guilty. He committed the crime that he was convicted of. But he wanted mercy. You know, you didn't want, if you had a 20-year sentence or a 30-year sentence, you're asking for mercy. You want the lesser sentence. Or you want, of course, probation or something of that nature. So it isn't a matter of whether you're guilty or not. It's a matter of whether you are guilty, you want mercy. You want mercy in a case like that. You know, it's an interesting situation in Texas. And Texas has what's called a Victims' Right Act. So that if someone commits a crime against you and they come up for trial, the prosecutor, the state prosecutor, will contact you as the victim, and you are allowed to give a statement in those proceedings. This goes back about 20 years ago. I was leaving services one Sabbath, had a fairly new car that I'd just gotten on, at that time, a fleet program. And I was going to visit a member leaving services. And I was stopped at a stop sign. and a truck came barreling out from the side and was trying to make the turn and didn't make it and just hit the side of my car and went all the way down the side, on the left side of the car. Just destroyed the car. And he and his companion ran into a fence. They were out of control, ran through a fence into a yard, jumped out and tried to run. They were so drunk they couldn't run. And this is still in the middle of the day. And they were so drunk they couldn't run, and they were falling and stumbling, and the police show up pretty quickly and grab them and arrest them. So that was it. The car was pretty much destroyed. They didn't total it, but they repaired it. And then about several weeks later, I received a call from the prosecuting attorney in this case. And he said, just want to let me know that in the state of Texas, the victim has a right to make his case as to what happened to him and the damage done to him. And he says, would you like to do that? I said, well, I don't know if I want to do that. He said, well, you're also allowed to recommend a sentence. He says, now, it's not that we have to follow it, but you have the opportunity to recommend. I said, well, he destroyed my car. I want the death penalty. And so the attorney laughed and he said, well, okay. He said, let me tell you the story about this young man. He says he's 21 years old, never been in trouble before. He was playing pool all afternoon and drinking beer, and he had too much. It's the first time he's ever been in trouble. So I said, okay. He said, we're going to ask for parole for him, but we want to make sure as to what you will say. And I said, well, I would agree with that. Give mercy to this young man who made a serious mistake, but his life is still ahead of him. And to go to prison, which he could have been facing some very serious prison time. But the idea of mercy or the idea of justice are huge, huge things, especially in our society today. Whereas even Mr. Sinan indicated it's rare that you can find justice today. The concept of atonement, the concept of justice are wrapped into one. The word atonement is an Old English word that means to atone for what has been done, to make things right. It can mean reparation. Also in the process, of course, of being a chaplain, years ago, I actually visited individuals on death row. There's a special website for those on death row. And every individual on death row, when they come to the point of execution, they're allowed to make a statement. They're allowed to make a statement. It's recorded and it's preserved. You can actually go and read the final words or last statement of those who've been executed. And an individual a number of years ago did sort of a montage. It's one of those things where when a word appears once and it's a certain size, if it appears twice, it's bigger and bigger. So you have this montage and you see the words that stand out that these individuals used. And the number one word was regret. I am sorry. The words were, I am sorry. I wish I could make this up. I wish I could do it all over again. And you see that over and over again. And I saw that so often in visiting individuals in prison. But atonement and justice are very, very important concepts. In Spanish today, the word for today, Day of Atonement, is El Día de Expiación. Well, the concept, that's actually closer to the word in English of expiation. Expiation means the act of making atonement or making things right. Making things right. The idea of correcting error, the idea of making something right again, is a huge part of the meaning of this day. So this afternoon, I want you to take a moment to think about your life. Think about your life and what your life has been like and how your life intertwines with the Day of Atonement, how it all works together in God's plan. You know, human beings are the ultimate in God's creation. Human beings are the ultimate in God's creation. The idea of evolution is really more of a joke than it is an actual thing, an actual science. And if you think about a human being, even if you just think about the human eye, and how on earth could that have evolved? God created man intact. He didn't evolve over millennia to where he developed, an eye or a hand or legs. As I said, the eye itself, if just one component is missing, you don't have vision. And yet, to think that could evolve, when does vision come? How does that work? God created man intact and gave man a wonderful future Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden were intact. They were offered a wonderful life. They were given a relationship with God, the joy of that experience. But something went terribly wrong. The Bible only gives the basics of the story. But in the story, another being entered the picture, one who was committed to evil and to destruction. This being came between man and God, and since that day has fought hard to alienate man from God and each other. He does it in small ways and big ways. He attempts to confuse those who are trying to obey God by convincing them that a little error is okay. Then there are those who are far from the truth. Maybe not bad people, but far from the truth. His operation, his methodology is to deceive, to lie, and to destroy. And he's done a masterful job for approximately 6,000 years. No wonder when John writes in Revelation 12, he calls him Satan the devil, who deceives the whole world. So today has something to do with him. The day has something to do with all of us. The day has something to do with him, with the world, and the future to come. It all comes together here as we approach the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. And it comes together on this day. Sometimes we go to the Feast of Trumpets, and then we're looking so forward to the Feast of Tabernacles, we sort of brush over the Day of Atonement. Without the Day of Atonement, there could be no Feast of Tabernacles. Without the Day of Atonement, there could be no future that we know of from Scripture. Because this day brings it back together. This day brings us back to a time when God can have a relationship with humanity and when Satan will be out of the picture. Let's go to Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3. The first prophecy, at least it's called in many places, the first prophecy in the Bible, has to do with, we would say, Jesus Christ and Satan. And that's a very interesting combination, or an interesting, I believe, an interesting way to see it, that this very first prophecy deals with what we're doing today. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. The judgment on Satan after the deception, and of course after what happened in the Garden of Eden. It says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So we find embedded in this simple prophecy that Jesus Christ is going to come, the seed will come, and he will die for the sins of mankind, and Satan will, it says, we will bruise his head. He will not be destroyed, but he will be punished. A day of atonement is coming, and things are going to be rectified once and for all. But it will require justice, in essence, for this being who destroyed this perfect setting in the Garden of Eden. And as was mentioned in the sermonette, this is coming in a yet future day. It hasn't happened yet. The head of the serpent was to be bruised. The head of the serpent is the location of his poison. He'll be prevented from spreading his poison again. Of course, we know of a short period of time of being released at the end of the millennium. But for the millennium to be put away where he can no longer poison mankind, his head will be bruised. But he also bruises the heel of the Messiah, actively involved in trying to destroy Jesus Christ, not only in what occurs in the wilderness where Christ confronts him, or he confronts Christ, and also in the death of Jesus Christ as he died for the sins of mankind. You know, it's very interesting to read about the sacrificial system in Scripture. The sacrificial system is a very interesting and intricate system that points to one simple thing, and that is, of course, the death of Jesus Christ for our sins. The sacrificial system points to that. The center of the sacrificial system, of course, is Jesus Christ. Notice Hebrews chapter 9. You know, the sacrifices were done over and over and over again over a period of time in ancient Israel. But in Hebrews, we find something that you don't, well, obviously there was intent in the Old Testament, but it's not clearly expounded in the Old Testament. But Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11. Hebrews 9, verse 11. But Christ came as high priest of the good things to come, with the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation. Not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood he entered the most holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the unclean sacrifices for the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? We're talking about a concept of atonement. We're talking about a concept of making things right again. So Jesus Christ's death is the only thing that can actually cleanse or remove sin. The sacrifices never could remove sin. They could make one ceremonially clean, but not something beyond that. They were reminders. They were looking forward to a time when the actual sacrifice of Jesus Christ could, or certainly would, make that atonement. Very, very important. Make things right. Remove sin from our lives. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 11. And every priest stands ministering daily and offering repeatedly the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of God, from that time waiting till his enemies are made his footstool. For by one offering he has perfected forever those who are being sanctified. For by one offering. So we see that Jesus Christ is that ultimate offering. Jesus Christ is the one. His offering makes it possible, his sacrifice makes it possible for all of us to have that relationship with God, to have sin removed from our lives. The Day of Atonement is central to that understanding. We have Passover in the spring of the year. Of course, Passover, unleavened bread, and Pentecost are pointed toward the church, or those who are the first fruits. We understand the sacrifice of Christ in the spring. So why do we need to understand it again on atonement? We're going to see that it is intricately tied to the fact that the whole world needs that sacrifice, not just the church, not just those being called now. That God's purpose is to save mankind, which requires all mankind to accept that sacrifice. And it also requires the justice for the one who's created so much havoc over so many years and destroyed so much of mankind and corrupted the relationship that man could have had with God. It's a tremendous thing and a tremendous amount of meaning here. First, we must understand who this being Satan is. What is such a big deal? Who is this being? Let's go to 2 Corinthians 4. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. You find that Satan today is called the god of this world. That should not be lost on us. The god of this world. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4. Verse 3. But even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, whose minds the god of this age has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them. So we find that Satan, the devil, is called the god of this age. That is no small position. That means he has influence on what happens in this world, around the world. And he uses that influence to destroy, to create animosity, to create hatred and anger. And we see a world filled with that. How do you get rid of that? Well, there's only one way to get rid of that, and that you must remove the source. And the source must be removed, or there can be no millennium. There can be no kingdom of God on this earth. It's going to continue in the chaos unless this being is removed. That's why this day becomes so significant. Without this day, there can be no Feast of Tabernacles. There can be no kingdom of God on this earth. This day is essential to God's plan because this day brings about atonement, justice, and all of those principles together, where Satan is dealt with and where all of mankind has an opportunity to partake of that sacrifice of Jesus Christ, to have their sins removed and now begin a new life and develop a relationship with God. All of that's possible because of this day. Notice 1 John chapter 5, if you doubt at all the influence that this being has on the world today. 1 John chapter 5, verse 19. Says, we know that we are of God, and the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. The whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. Just consider for a few minutes the conditions in the world today. The idea that mankind can solve his own problems has certainly been proven over many, many years as not being possible. Mankind has consistently devolved into war and fighting, to disease. Of course, has succumbed to disease, has succumbed to so much that's going on today, and it's only gotten worse. Matthew 24 and Revelation 6. Revelation 6 describes the opening of the 6 seals. The first 4 seals are reflective of what Christ said in Matthew 24, where he talks about events that are going to come in the end time. He begins with the Revelation 6 begins with the first horse, the white horse, but Matthew 24 begins with deception. Deception. Let's go to Matthew 24. Matthew chapter 24. Jesus Christ was, of course, asked about the end time. What will be the signs of the end time? Verse 3. And he begins by saying, take heed that no one deceives you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and will deceive many. So the first thing Christ mentions coming as you get closer to the end of the age, he talks about deception. Well, Revelation 6 describes that deception as an individual riding on a white horse. The white horse, the presenting themselves to be good, presenting themselves to have the truth. It's deception. Deception. I don't think there's any doubt but that there is deception in the world over everything. Religion, certainly there's deception. Look at the world's religions and tell me, where do they come from? Who's the author of all these religions? Doesn't mean that they're necessarily bad people. There are many, many people who try to live a good life, but they're deceived. Deception is real. It's out there. And of course, when people are deceived, they simply don't know they're deceived. But there are 2 areas of deception, total or just enough to lead you in a wrong direction. And there will be those who will come along in the end time, we're told, who will do everything they can to even deceive God's elect. So we're in that type of world today. There's no doubt that the opening of the seal and the idea that the white horse and representing deception is everywhere we look. Again, that shows that we are, and of course we've not just gotten here lately, but we are at a time leading up to the end of the age. And then the second horse, or the second thing Christ talks about. He says, you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. We live in the midst of chaos and wars today. Civilian deaths due to war have risen dramatically in the last century. We find everywhere there's war. There are websites that identify the wars that are being fought. There are 4 major conflicts going on right now. A major conflict is defined as over 10,000 casualties. The Afghan Civil War, which of course has changed in the last couple of months as far as our involvement, the Syrian Civil War, the Yemen Civil War, the drug war in Mexico, all have over 10,000 casualties in the last decade. 7 conflicts with less than 10,000 casualties. 26 conflicts with less than 1,000 casualties. A total of 37 conflicts in the world currently going on. And the U.S. is involved in actually most of them to some degree. Some of the other things that are going on, the Council on Foreign Relations has a website called Global Conflict Tracker. This is updated every few days. It says there are 5 areas of the world that have critical impact on the U.S. Afghanistan, South China Sea, East China Sea, North Korea, and Iran. They all have the potential to become massive wars in the future. 9 that are significant impacts on U.S. Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, Lebanon, Egypt, Ukraine, Turkey, and the Kurds, criminal violence in Mexico, Israeli-Palestine, Boko Haram in Nigeria, India and Pakistan conflict, and Venezuela. There's never been a time when there were so many wars and rumors of wars at one time. And the potential is absolutely incredible for a disaster just on the horizon. The next thing Christ talks about are famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. The third horse, of course, is the black horse, which is, of course, death. The idea, of course, of dying from a lack of food. Let me make sure. Let's go to Revelation chapter 6. I want to read that there. Revelation chapter 6 for this third horse. These are the signs. These are the things that tell us what's happening in the world as we approach the end. It says so I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on him had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine. So the implication, of course, is of famine and pestilence. Currently, the current statistics today, that 6,370,880 people died from hunger this year. 6,370,000 in the world. 10,220 people will die today from hunger in the world. Are there massive famines going on? Well, there are in some places. 6 countries are identified as being on the verge of starvation. Venezuela, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Syria, and Afghanistan, all on the verge. 4 countries are in actual famine: Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan, and Yemen. That's the world we live in. That's the world we live in. And then, of course, the fourth horse, we identify the pale horse as disease and other concerns. While we know about the COVID that's gone on in the last year and a half, a lot of other things get forgotten. In 2019, malaria killed 409,000 people. There were 229 million cases of malaria in the year 2019 and 409,000 deaths. This is the world we live in. Who is guilty? Who's created this world? This isn't the world that God created. This wasn't the life that God offered to Adam and Eve. This is a very different world, a world of chaos, confusion, and deception. Who is the author? Well, now let's go to Leviticus 16. Now we come to the Day of Atonement. Now we come to the meaning of this day and what it has to do with all of us. Leviticus chapter 16. It's important when you read Leviticus 16, and it's interesting to me that when you look at the festivals, all 7 are listed in Leviticus 23. But it isn't enough for the Day of Atonement with just Leviticus 23. You know, the Feast of Trumpets is a significant holy day, but there's very little said about it. It's only involved, at least references, only a few verses. Now we get to the New Testament, we understand about the trumpets and the coming of Christ. But the Day of Atonement, not only do we have it listed in Leviticus 23, but we have intricate instructions in Leviticus chapter 16. Leviticus 16 lays out in great detail the Day of Atonement. I don't know of any other holy day that gets quite as much reference and as much explanation. That's why, to some degree, today is considered one of the most holy days of the year in the Jewish community, Yom Kippur. Kippur has a reference to a covering. It's a day of covering. It's a day of reconciliation. It's a day of justice. It's a day of atonement. All of that comes together to create a new world, which will be the beginning of the millennium, which will follow this day. But the details are very important in Leviticus 16. Let's begin in verse 3. Thus Aaron shall come into the holy place with the blood of a young bull as a sin offering and of a ram as a burnt offering. So you know the story that the high priest could only go into the Holy of Holies once a year on the Day of Atonement. That was a very, very important ceremony that the high priest would be able to do that. Now, there are scholars who write about the Old Testament who say that this was sort of a throw-in, that God sort of threw this in because of the two sons of Aaron who brought strange fire, and they were killed, if you recall. And so God made it, at this point, he made it a law. He made it something required of them to come in, or the high priest to only come in once a year. And that would be on the Day of Atonement. And they get this because of the connection in the previous verses with the death of the two sons. But it's not an afterthought. It's a part of God's plan. And God lays it out in great detail, that it's the high priest, not another priest, not another Levi, but it's the high priest who must come into the Holy of Holies. And of course, he has a sacrifice, a sin offering. Now keep in mind that a sin offering always means death. Whatever the sin offering is doesn't come out alive. It's death. So we have a young bull as a sin offering and a ram as a burnt offering. Verse 4, he shall put the holy linen tunic and the linen trousers on his body. He shall be girded with a linen sash, and with the linen turban he shall be attired. These are holy garments. Therefore he shall wash his body in water and put them on. Now, you read in the Talmud that there were so many details that the Jews added about this as well. For example, the question in the Talmud, if you read much of the Talmud, it's actually sort of a talking back and forth. What if this happens? What if that happens? This is what you do. So they have a reference there to, well, what if the high priest dies in the Holy of Holies? What do? You can't go in. So according to this, is what they would do is they would tie a rope around his leg so that if he died inside, they could drag him out and wouldn't have to go in. But the details were there as to this being a very important ceremony that occurred once a year. It says, and he shall take from the congregation of the children of Israel 2 kids of the goats as a sin offering and 1 ram as a burnt offering. Now we're going to find out that of the 2 goats selected, only one is going to become a sin offering. You see, a sin offering must die. If it doesn't die, then it's not a sin offering. But both are possible at this point. You have 2 kids, both could be the sin offering. Either could be the sin offering. Verse 6, Aaron shall offer the bull as a sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself and for his house. So here we have the concept of atonement. So this sacrifice was to do what? To cleanse them. They become ceremonially clean. It's an atonement in that sense. But as we read in Hebrews, it doesn't do away with sin. It doesn't cleanse your conscience or your inside. There's something else that has to do that. But the concept is the same. It's atoning for something. It's making something okay. It's where the jury has declared you're guilty, but we're not going to punish you. But we're going to punish someone else, or someone's going to come in your stead. That's the concept of the Day of Atonement. Atonement, or making things right. How do we get back to being right? How do we get back to the Garden of Eden? Well, there are a couple of things that must happen. The sacrifice of Jesus Christ to atone for sins, and the putting away of Satan to provide the justice for what has been done to our society for 6,000 years. Those 2 things represent 2 different goats. Verse 7, he shall take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then Aaron shall cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for the Lord, and the other lot for the Azazel, or it says here, scapegoat. 2 different things must happen on the Day of Atonement. 1, we must have the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. But you say, well, we already had that at Passover. Well, of course we did. But the world hasn't had it yet. The sacrifice of Jesus Christ for the world. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. For whom? For you and me? Yes. For the world? Yes. So the first goat, the one that lot falls on for the Lord, is the sacrifice. This lot is for the Lord. It pictures Jesus Christ. It pictures Christ's sacrifice now for the world. If you look at the holy days or the festivals, you have the three in the spring. You have Passover, unleavened bread, and Pentecost are all focused on the church. Passover, of course, for the children of Israel, God's people that he selected. And then, of course, obviously for the church today, the days of unleavened bread, putting sin out of our lives. Pentecost, receiving God's Holy Spirit. Those are all geared toward those being called now. We get to the Feast of Trumpets. Now we begin to shift the focus to the saving of the world. The saints come with Jesus Christ. They rise to meet him in the air. And now the salvation of the world begins. But it cannot happen until atonement. And on the Day of Atonement, one goat pictures looking back to the sacrifice of Christ, but for the world now. And the other goat is the justice that has to occur for things to be atoned for. So that we can begin in the millennium. You know, there are going to be some fighting and other things go on at the beginning of the millennium. But as we get into the millennium, where we create an atmosphere that's going to go back to where it once was. When we were in the garden, or when man was in the Garden of Eden. And man now has a relationship with God, or can have. And Satan is gone. We're back to the garden without Satan. That's the Day of Atonement. So Aaron says, verse 9, and Aaron shall bring the goat on which the Lord's lot fell and offer it as a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot fell to be the azazel or scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to do what? To make atonement upon it, and to let it go as the azazel into the wilderness. Not killed. This is not a sin offering. This is an atonement. This is a justify, or this is justice, and bringing us back to an atmosphere that was in the beginning, atoning for what's occurred over all of these years. And it's being put away. Look at verse 20. And when he has made an end of atoning for the holy place, the tabernacle of meeting, and the altar, he shall bring the live goat. Aaron shall lay both his hands on the head of the goat, confess over it all the iniquities of the children of Israel, and all their transgressions, concerning all their sins, putting them on the head of the goat, and shall send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a suitable man. The goat shall bear on itself all their iniquities to an uninhabited land, and he shall release the goat in the wilderness. So this is an unusual ceremony. There's nothing like it in all of the Bible, where this goat is selected and is let loose, but away from everyone in the wilderness area, so it will have no contact with anyone, and will never, well, I shouldn't say never again, but for 1,000 years, will have no influence over any human being. Only then can atonement truly occur. Only then can things be put back to where they were. Only then can there be a millennium of happiness and joy with man having a relationship with God. When God created Adam and Eve and put them in the garden, it was perfection. Adam and Eve had a relationship with God. They walked and talked with God. And then Satan entered the picture. The real cause of all evil in the world started there. And until that cause is addressed, it will never be resolved. And only through the Day of Atonement can it be resolved. You know, there must be a sin offering. Someone must pay the price for a crime that was committed. It is only fair and just, and justice would dictate that it be a person who committed the crime. You know, we normally think of justice, the person who commits the crime is the one that should be punished. And yet we know that in God's plan, those who've committed the sins have an opportunity to have the sacrifice of Christ and have them atoned for and removed, because Christ paid the penalty. There was a penalty paid, but Christ paid it. But what about Satan? You know, I think back again to the man's justice system is, you know, certainly flawed in many ways, but there are some proper concepts in it. For example, in the state of Texas, if you're with someone who commits a crime, you're with them, maybe you're driving the car, whatever it may be, maybe you might even think you're innocent, and someone kills another person, then you, even though you didn't fire the gun, you are a co-conspirator, and you are subject to the same penalty that person would get. you're subject to that same penalty. You may have been an influence, you may have been something else, but you can be convicted as well. The co-conspirator, you might say, in all of this is certainly Satan himself. Although he's more than just a co-conspirator, he is an instigator. He is one who's caused and created so much evil in the world. But he also must be convicted, and as Mr. Simon showed, he's already been convicted in that sense. But his future has not been determined yet, or it's not come to that point. But the Day of Atonement brings us to that point. In God's plan, there is a replacement for our lives, and that's the life of Jesus Christ. There's only one life that could satisfy, one death that could satisfy all the sins of the world. It can't be some created being, can't be an angel. It has to be God himself. And how that all happened, I can't figure it out. But God died for our sins. That's the only sacrifice that would make possible the atoning of all sin. But it doesn't do away with the cause. And as long as the cause is around, more sin will result. And of course, that's certainly known. And we have to get to the Day of Atonement. Christ is the sin offering. The goat that was the sin offering represented Jesus Christ. The second goat represents Satan himself. And his fate during the millennium is to be cast aside, to put away, where he can no longer influence anyone else. He can no longer cause someone to sin. He can no longer cause someone to be confused and to stumble. He will be gone. And that will make a wonderful, wonderful world that we will celebrate starting next week, the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. But it's not possible. It is not possible without the Day of Atonement. Let's go to Revelation chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20. This is the sentencing, you might say, of Satan. It's the same example in Leviticus 16 of putting the goat away in the wilderness area. Satan is going to be put in a confined area where he will have no influence with anyone. This is clearly outlined in Revelation chapter 20. After the return of Jesus Christ in Revelation chapter 19, we come to chapter 20. We believe this is chronological. So just as we have the return of Christ in chapter 19, the first thing, as we see here, that Christ will do, says that I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things he must be released for a little time. And of course that's later in the story, at the end of the millennium, when Satan is released for a short time. We can speculate on why that happens. I mean, I think there are many valid reasons we could come up with why it happens. I simply believe God will have to explain that to us as to the intent. Again, I have things that I see and I believe, well, that makes sense as to why he would be released. You know, we can come up with those lists. But God will have to explain that part to us. We get to the point where, of course, the millennium, the reign of Jesus Christ on this earth, and then the great white throne judgment, when all judgment will take place. Eternal judgment will occur at that time. But Satan is put away. You know, if you think about the times that we live and the influence of Satan, then you realize what Christ was really saying in Matthew chapter 6. And we read over this, and I'm not sure we get the full impact of what Christ is trying to tell us here in Matthew chapter 6, in what's called the model prayer. Notice verse 13. It says we're to pray that do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil, or as this verse says, from the evil one. Deliver us from the evil one. The author of evil, the author of lies, the father of lies, a murderer from the beginning, his desire is pure evil. And he's wreaked that upon the world for 6,000 years. And Christ warns us to pray that we be spared from this evil one, that God deliver us from this one. Why? Because he's always around. He's always looking for ways to divide and to destroy. How many times have we seen, and even in our own lives, sometimes things just make us angry and we act in a way, well, where did that come from? Where does that all come from? Now, again, I'm not implying, Satan's kind of hanging around on your shoulder and he's whispering in your ear or something, but that he is always there, wanting you to stumble, wanting you to fail. He tried it on Jesus Christ. You can only imagine he's certainly going to try it on all of us. His methods have never changed and will not change. The Day of Atonement is the day that he is put away. The Day of Atonement is the day that atonement occurs for the world, reconciliation in that sense, and then also, of course, the justice and removal of Satan for the 1,000 years coming up. Passover is specifically for those who escaped from Egypt, those who are called the firstfruits today, those who are part of the first harvest. But on the Day of Atonement, the sacrifice of Christ is offered to everyone. The fall harvest is the large harvest when God will set his hand to save the world. After it has been determined that we're all guilty, we must accept the sacrifice of Jesus Christ for our sins. The court case has gone on. We've all been convicted, but Jesus Christ has stepped up to be the sacrifice for our sins. But then we must be sentenced, or someone else must be sentenced, or there's a break in the system. Before receiving our commuted sentence, the real cause of all crime is brought before the court and assessed the penalty of banishment. Satan is brought into the courtroom and a surprise announcement is made, if you will, by the judge. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now located the real criminal, the one who was the mastermind behind all the crime. You are given your freedom, but the real culprit is bound. Satan is put away for 1,000 years. A number of years ago, there was a book that came out. The title of the book is The Lucifer Effect. The name of the book, sometimes I buy books because of the subject. Sometimes the title will get me. And so I found this book called The Lucifer Effect. Well, what is that all about? It's an amazing story in this book. In the 1970s, the author of this book, in the 1970s, the author put together an experiment on the topic, and it's known as the Stanford Prison Experiment. And this experiment, or the premise behind this experiment, is that everyone is capable of evil. Everyone is capable of evil. And of course, the title was The Lucifer Effect, Lucifer being the source of all evil. So everyone is capable of evil. So here he set up this experiment, a rather famous experiment from the 1970s. There were two volunteers, a student and a teacher. The student was in on the roost that there was going to be constructed. The teacher was in one room and the student was in another room. The student was hooked up, at least it appeared to be hooked up, to electrical nodes, I guess, that were put on his arms and around his neck. And the teacher is in the other room. And the teacher would read or ask questions of the student. And every time the student would get a wrong answer, the teacher was told to give him a shock of electricity. And every time he gave a wrong answer, he was told to increase the electricity. And even though the student would scream with pain and beg the teacher not to do it again, because the teacher was told that if you get a wrong answer, you get a shock of electricity. 60% of the teachers continued to the end, potentially doing serious physical harm to the student. Now, of course, it wasn't happening, and it was all fake. But the purpose was to see if a normal person, under certain conditions, would do harm to a perfect stranger if instructed by someone in charge. The author recognized a profound truth, that each one of us is capable of evil. Not everyone is a murderer, but each of us can be persuaded to do evil. While he doesn't say it quite this way, his point is that there is an evil spirit who has access to human beings and can tempt them to do evil. And yet always, it seems to be doing what maybe you're being instructed to do. We've struggled to explain how in Germany, a few decades ago, human beings could actually put other human beings to death. There's something there. And it's not innate in a human being necessarily. Human beings have human nature, but there's something else involved that causes so much of this. The Bible confirms that that is true. In traveling to Rwanda a few years ago and looking at all the museums of all the people that were killed there, I think it was 900,000 people hacked to death in a period of 100 days. Why? You know, the neighbors killing neighbors. The only way for me to explain it is that there's a spirit involved. There's a spirit that causes people to be capable of doing harm to another human being because they're being told to or because they're being given certain information. You know, I've always thought of the verse in the Bible where God said they're going to put you to death and think they've done God a favor, that they've done God's will. How does that happen? Well, it happens in the world today because of this being. Now, while the book doesn't quite get to the true cause, it does make several observations about an influence acting upon human beings, which produces evil under the right circumstances. The author uses the bad apple example as being inadequate. He says it's not the apple because all the apples are capable of rotting, but he says it's not the apple, it's the barrel that's rotten. It's society that's rotten. It permeates all of society. And some apples rot. Now again, we use the example of the rotten apple that causes all to be rotten. He says society is the breeding ground of evil. So circumstances become the real cause of evil. It is the barrel makers who cause the evil in this analogy. Those in charge of society who created the atmosphere that produces the evil. Man doesn't want to acknowledge the existence of an evil being who promotes evil in human beings, since they don't want to accept that the Bible is true. And the Bible clearly identifies this being. John chapter 3, verse 16. There is a day coming that God will set his hand to save the world. He will stop the world from total destruction. But in order to keep it from being destroyed, Satan must be dealt with. John 3, verse 16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Verse 17, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. How will that happen? Christ must return. It isn't going to happen during this period of time. Christ must return. And Satan must be dealt with. Without the Day of Atonement, there can be no salvation for mankind. Without the Day of Atonement, there can be no millennium. The concept of atonement is a concept of reconciliation with God. Reconciliation can only occur if Satan is dealt with. Reconciliation can only be possible if Satan is put away. As long as Satan is around, there can be no reconciliation with God, at least not permanently, because Satan is always there to cause human beings to stumble. The reconciliation is defined as bringing the alienated together. The theological concept of reconciliation refers to bringing two alienated parties into harmony. It is establishing of peace in a relationship once marked by separation and hostility. Imagine all the conflicts and hatreds that exist today. We will be in the middle of this process when the millennium begins as kings and priests to bring about that total reconciliation. But without the Day of Atonement, it is not possible. Leviticus 23 tells us that today, the 10th day of the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar, is the Day of Atonement. It comes once a year to remind us of what the story really is about. If we go back to the courtroom, as we come to the conclusion, the trial has been concluded, and you and I, along with the rest of the world, have been found guilty. We're guilty of the death of Jesus Christ. We're guilty of all the sins we've committed. But Jesus Christ willingly gave his life for us. We are convicted. We are guilty. As I said, so many times I've sat across from one of the inmates, prisoners, even on death row, and they acknowledge they're guilty. They even say, we deserve what we're getting, but we want mercy. We don't want to die. We don't want to spend the rest of our lives in prison. We regret what we've done. How do we change it? Well, in our society today, it cannot be changed, but it will be changed in the future. We are guilty. We have been convicted, but we won't go to prison, and we don't have to die, not eternally. The court declares the case is closed. But the story doesn't end there. Someone must accept responsibility for the massive, dysfunctional world we live in. The responsibility must go somewhere. Remember, there has been a murder. In a dramatic twist of the courtroom drama, as the jury assesses the proper punishment, a new suspect is named in the case, and the responsibility is placed on him. This is totally out of order for any court in today's world, but this court is no human court. It is the divine justice and mercy of the God of heaven, the eternal God. The Feast of Tabernacles can now come. It cannot come until this is dealt with, but then it can come. This coming Monday night, we will begin the Feast of Tabernacles. We begin a celebration. The second goat, Satan, is bound for 1,000 years as the first phase of his punishment. And after 1,000 years, he's released for a short while before suffering his ultimate penalty, banishment for all eternity. What a powerful and wonderful day, the Day of Atonement, a day of expiation. We must, brethren, not only appreciate but give God thanks for his great plan. It's the only thing that makes sense in a confused, disruptive, and totally chaotic world that we live in. We must thank God for the fact that our families are not lost, but will one day have an opportunity to understand. They will have their opportunity for atonement. They will have their opportunity for the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and they will then know where the pain came from, the real cause of all human suffering that began in the Garden of Eden. Let's thank God for all of these things, and thank God for the day that's coming when we will all of mankind will understand. So I hope you have a wonderful feast. Drive safely, be safe during the feast. It is a time to rejoice, and we must not allow anything to take our joy away, because this is the great blessing of being a part of God's way of life, understanding the truth, and celebrating what the world will be like once Satan is gone and we've had the sacrifice of Jesus Christ for our sins.
Thank you, Mr. Franks. Well, brethren, as we wind down to the end of this service, I'd like to all say have a safe, wonderful, and prosperous Feast of Tabernacles. And as we are going there to serve our future, our brothers and sisters, along with serving God, may we always keep in mind that the world may not understand what we do, but we are a light to them. So may we serve God and brighten us that way as we look forward for the kingdom of God and to be the future citizens there. Brethren, for our final hymn, let's all stand and turn to number 137. Hymn number 137. A time that we can all look forward to. Behold, the day will come. And following this hymn, I'd like to ask our elder back up here, Mr. Jim McTiernan, to come up and lead us in the closing prayer. Hymn number 137.
They will take us into the
great God and Holy Father, we come before you, Father, so grateful for the peace and safety that you give us to come here and worship you and hear your messages. We pray now, Father, for all those who would love to be going to the feast, but for some reason can't. We ask you to give them a special blessing. And Father, for those who are traveling to the feast, we ask for safe passage. And we ask, Father, that you camp your angels around each feast site to protect us from the evil one's viruses and sickness and confusion, and give us peace and help us to rejoice in your holy days. So we thank you, Father, and we thank you so much for it all. In the name of your Son, Jesus the Christ. Amen.